on the Squatchers Lounge podcast. David and the Reverend Jeff take on a topic that we feel is underutilized in this field. Because it's October, and it's time for Fall Squatching. So why would you want to do your research in the fall? Are there any drawbacks? What the hell is research anyway? And the most important question of all, will I still look good in my summer real tree? So without further ado, I give to you our host, the man, the myth, the Reverend Jeff Kelly.
Well, welcome everybody to the Squatchers Lounge podcast, the #1 Bigfoot podcast on the planet. That's right. Might be hosted by a bearded guy in Alameda, but it doesn't matter. We're still #1. As with me always is Father David Batdorf. How you doing, Father Batdorf?
I'm going to say it's at least the the #1 Sasquatch podcast in the solar system.
Well, yeah, we can at least
possibly
say
universe. I don't know. Like, where did the Sasquatch come from when the great aliens exiled them here for mining gold for their purposes? That's a good question.
Right. People keep coming back week after week for some reason. I don't exactly know why. Everybody tells me I'm like the worst squatcher on the planet, but let me tell you, folks, it all adds up. We've been out in the field all season long, and it's crazy the kind of places that I've actually made it to this year, and we're not even done yet. So, you know, what we're going to talk about at the top of the hour always is the Squatchers Lounge news. That's right. I go out and I scour the web for the greatest and latest and greatest, and David and I were just having this amazing conversation pre-show. Too bad we can't let you guys see that kind of stuff. But we were talking about this. New York court will decide if chimpanzees qualify for legal personhood. David, you got to clue me in on what exactly is going on. Are they trying to say chimps are people too?
So I was going to call out, you know, like I freaking love it's not freaking, but like the IFL science, you know, like on Facebook. That's like the one thing in my newsfeed that I really look forward to. That's not the Squatchers Lounge, but their clickbait was are chimpanzees people? ? That's not the question. They're not saying that chimpanzees are people, not that they have like legal rights of a person, like, you know, like the human rights and yada yada yada. They're talking about a legal personhood. So let's back this up to like 1970 and Stephen Wise going off and really thinking deeply. And we're not talking about PETA. We're not talking about activists. Like deeply about the cognition and consciousness of apes in particular, the greater apes, and do they have an expectation of self, basically, or of like, you know, to not be harmed, to not be captured or detained or these other things. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, that could be fine, that could work out for them. They can be calm and collected in captivity if treated properly. But when not treated properly, are they acutely aware of that in the same way that we are, because they have a lot of the same stresses and emotions and other things, and there's all these studies that go up with blah, 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 blah. This isn't PETA just saying, well, but they're people. No, he's trying to describe a legal person, which here, let's go into this. This is from the Cornell University of Law, which we all know the Cornell University also has the Macaulay sound library of all the animals, which is great. If you know your taxon, go check out the animal sounds. If you hear anything you're like, that could be, they have some amazing sounds. So a legal person refers to a non-human entity that is treated as a person for limited legal purposes. Corporations, for example. Legal persons can sue and be sued, own property, and enter into contracts. Well, obviously, property and contracts are a little bit beyond the whole thing. But anyway, to sue and be sued, like, you know, is another interesting thing. So that's not what they're arguing. This is how we use a legal person, is a non-human entity. Basically, corporations and other things that you can sue that's not a person, like an actual human person. In most countries, legal persons cannot vote, marry, hold public office. They can't do this, that, the other. So the argument is that, like, the best analogy I can come up with is like, okay, Helen Keller cannot immediately, to you and me, without knowing the language and the way, like, cannot describe their exact right now. Like, okay, this is what my emotional and physical state is right now.
But she's a person.
But she's a person, but she's acutely aware of her emotional and physical state right now and into the future. Like if there's ongoing abuse going on, like she's gonna have to deal with that. So can a chimpanzee. So could not somebody or the state or the people of the state sue on Helen Keller's behalf if there
Sure,
was
because
something...
she's a person.
Exactly. So
no
the
matter
argument is like the difference in that sort of scenario. If we're going to give this sort of, the right to have somebody sue on the behalf of a corporation or to sue a corporation, like I don't see any reason to sue. Like, are we going to have to go into legal battles if a chimpanzee rips somebody's face off? Probably not. But basically what they're saying is that, we as rational, free-thinking people have a responsibility to look into this, and the reason that they keep taking this to court and taking this to task is a challenge of what is human and non-human consciousness in the eyes of the law.
We have a responsibility to do it because they're sentient beings, not because they're persons. See,
exactly.
That's
and that's the thing.
We already have the responsibility to not allow this type of abuse and discourse to go on to these sentient beings as it is. Why do we now need to change the state of a great ape to a person of any sort? But like we said earlier, the differences between us and chimps is what makes us people.
Exactly. So, but the similarities in this case versus like a dog or some other things is how they're posing this argument is, do they have the same ability to foresee future damage or problems, or like the future self-ish thing? It's not exactly the same. We've talked about that on other podcasts.
Right.
Do they have enough of that future projection for somebody to actually step in and take legal action on their behalf? Because right now you can't, and it's just a bunch of people waving flags. It's PETA, right? So, but this is not PETA, and they're not arguing the same things as PETA, and they're not, these are scientists, not the tree huggers of the world, what have you. So this is an interesting thing, and so there's three things that are going for this suit that's coming up in New York, which is actually, so one is that okay, so we've since their last major lawsuit, we've fully disclosed the DNA sequencing between us and chimpanzees, and we know how close we are. Two, the Cambridge Declaration of Non-Human Consciousness has come out. That's very significant as well. And three, the New York court actually disallowed the gentleman who owns this chimpanzee that they're suing for holding them in inappropriate conditions, and so they're suing this man, and that guy was going. There's three things that are really going for this. It's very interesting, and that's why I want to watch it. Like it's a really complex. It's a much bigger thing than we're going to be able to go into in this podcast. We've already gone kind of a little over on it.
Yeah,
but it's a really interesting
thing. It was
thing
good to talk about, though.
Yeah, but it does. It relates to Sasquatch, because if we're thinking the Sasquatch is at least as related to us as a chimpanzee, will not some of these things come into play? Like, and how do those you don't say human rights, but those non-human rights apply? Could somebody sue on the behalf of Sasquatch? Based on this sort of law study, could somebody sue logging companies because Sasquatch has an expectation of land? Probably not. I'm just going to say that right now. Probably not. But those are questions that would come up in this topic.
Show me a title. That's what the white man said to the red man. Show me a title where you own anything. Show me something that says a white man says that you own that, and we'll give it to Sasquatch too.
Show me that Sasquatch doesn't live just fine on DNR land, which is probably more true than on state park land.
About BLM land or any. Okay,
yeah,
so moving on to that.
Mm-hmm.
According to Nature.com, which, we like Nature.com because we can probably vet this with two other web sources out there. But
and I'll probably link you to it.
Right, 40,000-year-old Indonesian cave artwork has been discovered. Published October 8th in Nature. The 40,000 years ago is the now oldest cave painting types of work that we've been able to find in an Indonesian cave at that, which tells us what, David? That tells us that people were everywhere a long time ago.
Like, the find is not shocking. I mean, we knew people were, like, especially along that Indochina like route down through the south, like Indonesia. That means we were water traveling, but at that time we kind of were water traveling, and then like all sorts of other things. But it's a really significant find in that it is one of the already possibly the oldest thing that we found yet that shows art in like complex art in caves. What's next? I mean, that's pre-extinction of Neanderthal and pre-extinction of Denisova. Like, that's pretty significant. Like, you think about that in those terms, and art in Indonesia, like that's 30,000 years prior to the extinction of Homo florenziensis. Are they going to have pictures of little people that will actually like say, "Whoa, that means something"? So these are really, really. I mean, like, just the farther back you go, the more inferences you get. It's really exciting stuff.
Yep, and now they're going through to investigate it further, and who knows how far back they'll be able to identify them. And the deeper they get into excavations of caves, the deeper layers they in, the older further back they get. Well, they already know they're in an area from 40,000 years ago that had those types of beings that were creating art. They're going to keep digging deeper, to keep going back further and further to see how far it started from the same locations. Obviously, these people were probably still not the first ones to blow, red pigment across their hand on the wall to leave a print behind. I mean, it's much more than that. Don't get me wrong. There's actually stylizations of people. There's stylizations of animals, and that says a lot to think that they can convey it from in here to on the wall, even if it's stick figures.
Well, but again, 40,000 years ago, I mean, that means that it took less than 50,000 years to get from one area to another. And you think about like how fast culture moves or plots move. I mean, you only need to get like how many miles is that? It's much less than 50,000. Are we talking about like 10,000 miles in 50,000 years? I mean, you don't have to move very far per year.
Well, the Earth is only like 10,500 and something miles around, I believe.
Yeah, but to get from like Africa, like to this other area, like you're looking
talking 4,000 miles. You're talking about a summer of walking.
Yeah. But you think about how encampments move and this, that, and the other, and if you're not using, if you're using temporary but forever structures like caves or whatever, you just move from one area to another. You find another cave, like, hey, let's go over here, and then everybody moves over there. It's like, hey, this is good, yeah. But you don't have to, like, 4,000 miles over the course of 50,000 years
is nothing. Is a drop in the bottom.
Yeah, like basically you're just, it's like, okay, well, we had 2 generations and now you guys got to move 3 miles down that way.
Right.
So that's
the other show that was posted up in the lounge, the 2.5 hour Becoming Human Evolution show. I actually watched it all today in one sitting. It was just kind of on in the background. But one of the things that it was talking about was how unstable those valleys and those areas had become towards the period that we're talking about, when there were multiple species of human-like animals still on the planet, that those were unpredictable times, which made the life forms move through those valleys and areas more often than they would have actually had to have done so, because they were so unstable that periods of 10 years would make it go from wet to dry. So, and that was one of the things that kind of drove the human species out of the African valleys and into the upper valleys and going up towards the Asian areas as well.
Well, it was more stable, and B, like so like it works a lot like glaciation too. Like that moved, like the migration of humans. Like if you figure like everybody's in the valley, and then you're just like, well, okay, we got to split. Like, okay, it's dry. You go that way, I'll go this way. There's not enough food down here, and then there's plenty of food. and then that dries, and then you have to move again, and then that dries, and then you have to move again, and like that drove the migration. It wasn't in a definite like direction or pattern. We always draw these arrows and lines, and like okay, over the thousands and thousands of years, it started here and eventually ended up here. If you trace the genetics back, it wasn't a walk. It wasn't a migration like we're talking about, like the caribou, migrating from north to south or something like that. We're talking about a centrifugal migration, but the gene flow that we can map looks like a direction. It's an equation. It's an XY axis that we can plot against, right?
Because we're standing at the end of that XY plot.
Exactly, trying to look back, and we're like, okay, point here to point here, and probably went over or under the Himalayas. That's pretty much what we're looking at there. So
right. So that was really interesting as well. And the last thing I wanted to cover tonight in the newsy type stuff, apparently the little Indian boy who took 3 pictures of a Sasquatch on his iPad video was taken down, and people were it seemed to be quite saddened about that. Well, I threw a little bit of investigation work, and I believe it was posted yesterday in the Coalition page. There's been some question about the actual Bigfoot that's in this particular page. Randy posted this up yesterday, a little bit of an enhancement of a still shot from the video, and apparently there seems to be some evidence of a toilet paper roll hanging on one of the sticks, and what appears to be a couple of squares of toilet paper in said Bigfoot's hand. That might have something to do with why it was taken down. I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure quite evident. I don't think the little kid was meaning for it to get as big as it did. But I'm calling guys shitting in the woods on this one. What are you thinking, David?
I'm thinking that's real squatchy right there. So we all know you don't hang your toilet paper that high. You can't reach it. That's why you had to go up and down and up and down. I mean, come on, amateur. But, yeah, so, I mean, again, here we are. Something that goes online. We grab onto it. We throw it all out there. And then probably the death threats came in, and so the kid took it offline, and it was just supposed to be a joke.
Right, this is probably Uncle Harry getting up while they're out there camping, taking a crap. But they did make a big deal out of it because maybe they thought that they could pull the wool over the Sasquatch community's eyes. Everybody wants to believe. David knows I am the first one that'll tell you I want this to be real. I want this to be high quality, high definition of a Bigfoot taking a shit in the woods. Unfortunately, it just isn't. Now, I'm not saying that anybody's trying to do anything. I'm just asking questions like old Hairboy does. Speaking of Hairboy, David, did you on the last episode of In Search of Aliens, they did the founding fathers of America, and old Giorgio went to Washington D.C. and had lots of discussions about how this was made in Washington, D.C., and how that was made in Washington, D.C. But I don't think he understands that Philadelphia was actually the capital of America for quite some time, long before Washington, D.C. was ever actually designed and built. One slight little factor I think they quite have missed out on, don't you think?
Yeah, it could be, and like the founding fathers, there was no District of Columbia. Like that was probably tribal land still at that point.
Swamp. Yeah, it was swampland. Half an inch every year. The Washington Monument's eventually going to fall over into its reflecting pond. It's horrible, dude. They've got all kind of structural problems with every one of those huge monumental buildings in D.C. because it was a swamp, and they stole it from the Indians, pretty much. But it's just funny.
If only they had taken a note from Disney.
It just goes to show that when a TV show gives somebody credentials, doesn't mean anything. It means zero. I saw a bunch of pictures being posted in some of their groups. Dr. Meldrum and Bill Brock and Melissa Winadair and Rob Goudet and God, I'm missing somebody. They're all hanging out on some Sasquatch project thing. I guess the Sasquatch project is coming back. I don't know. We were promised that like 2 years ago or something. Who knows what's going on with it, people? Who cares? I'd like to see let's see some results, some evidence. And speaking of evidence, David, it is again that time, my brother. Now, last week, we got to debut the brown that we caught while we were down there on expedition. And let me go ahead for everybody. Let's play the original so that they hear them and remember what we're talking about now. This was the first whoop that we heard last week. Now we were actually pretty impressed with that as it was. Here then we caught the second fowl, which was the howl. Well, since then, I've actually been able to take the time and do my own little magic and enhancement on it myself. And the very first one, let's play the whoop first for everybody to see if they can understand why we were so excited that we were going to be able to bring this up when we were talking about it. Now that we were able to bring that up quite a bit. I mean that's not a dog. There's a dog for reference right before it.
Yeah, dog barks like ever so like sound a little choppy on my end. We'll see what happens like in at the end. We should definitely play it one more time. But like again, like that's a definite like it sounds primate. It could be a person, which is always an option. But that again. Just really give it like a listen. It's interesting to me.
It's interesting to me as well. I'm going to try and free up a couple of my resources here and see if we can. Let's go ahead and replay that one. Just I'll play it a couple of times in a row. That way we'll make sure that we get a good one out there.
I have never heard a coyote go whoop.
No, I've never heard a coyote put a W on anything. People put W's on things. Chimps put W's on things. I've sat at the Oakland Zoo and heard that sound.
That one for me sounds really a lot like I've heard the gibbons. We don't have chimpanzees at the zoo up here, but like I posted some stuff in the lounge a while ago about Kanzi or whatever. Sounds a lot like Kanzi's. Almost excited, like, hey, look what I did, like kind of whoop.
Yeah, the level of sound that we're actually able to bring it up at this point. That's how loud it was when we were sitting at the Sierra site. I mean, in your ears, it was that loud without the white noise.
You see, that particular vocalization I missed because somebody else was talking next to me. So that was really, really quiet. But the next one that we're going to show here was one that stopped everybody at the camp. Everybody stopped.
I was in my hammock and even I stopped, okay? Yeah, I was already stopped and I still stopped.
Up when this happened.
Yeah, this is the enhancement of the howl video from last week.
Okay, and right after that, the coyotes exploded. Was similar, but that howl is distinctly different. So, for me, it begs the question: the hell is that? Is that the weirdest coyote doing something I've never heard a coyote do? Like a coyote can howl. A coyote can howl, but it typically it doesn't do a sustained. I mean,
the yip yap.
Well, but I mean, they yip, they yap. They can howl, but they usually do like oh, like they have to like refresh the lungs or whatever it is that they're doing in that. Like, I've never heard a sustained 7-second just straight up like that. But then you listen to that other whoop, and it's kind of in that same like range, which is not, I've never heard of Sasquatch. I've never seen a Sasquatch. So that's not what I was expecting, but does that make it wrong? I was expecting, no, that's maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's whoop.
Well, and that becomes the other thing is the range of vocalizations are going to be great in anything that we're talking about. But this is actually 10 solid seconds long. And it sounds as though it's on a ridgeline coming down and echoing off of the canyons, because you can actually hear a good 3/4 of a second echo at the very end of it.
Well, and some of that's the other things that are happening, but listening to that for me put it probably like near the river area. I mean, right. Which was within a half a mile, which is what you would expect to hear when we're all sitting in trees like that. Over that, and it's going to be on the wind or inaudible. So that was a really interesting. I mean, interesting vocalization. I mean, it has still got me scratching my head so much. I want to go back.
Go back and get some more, and that becomes the question. The one whoop was definitely much closer to camp. These were both captured on the same recorder, on the same night. So the just the single whoop. And the howl. Were both picked up on Kurt's recorder the night that we were there. So, the whoop was obviously much closer than what the whale was.
Exactly. But they were in two different directions as well. So, like, again, people are, well, what is this vocalization? Why would you do that? If you're this stealthy, beast, why would you make all this noise? Well, it would be for some sort of communication. I mean, obviously, right? Like, why else would you do that? So we all posit that they're not going to be in big groups all huddled together all the time, like walking through like a bunch of tourists in the woods or something like that. So it would make sense that they would need some form of conversation between them or whatnot. So, I mean, I don't know. It's still, for me, it's up in the air. Like, is it the weirdest set of coyotes that I've ever heard in my entire life? Or is that, like, again, that's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah, and see, I've heard both of those things, multiple locations here on the West Coast this year. The whale like that I've heard on the air, on the wind, many times, but nothing definitive to where I can actually see the peaks and the valleys in the sound file. I mean, this is the first one I've ever where there's actually been any data to actually even work with other than just a flat line that you can barely hear that we can super enhance and you can barely hear over the white noise. That's not what these files are. These files are definitely way above the white noise level, and there is a ton of data within the actual files themselves to actually be able to work with. So we're going to continue to work with them, people, and see if we can't do something a little bit better with them, clean them up a little more, maybe get some of that white noise out of it. And while we're on the topic of audio, David, I think it's about that time, buddy.
Oh my gosh.
Minutes on science.
All right, so here I am thinking about audio and me, the geek that I am, and how, my goodness, how are we gonna take this data, if it is data, or if it's something that's happening? Like if you're in an area like the Browns is supposed to be, and you're getting this audio all the time. If you're we get stuff from Jim Sherman all the time. He's another friend of the lounge. Like, what are we going to do with this information? If we're out there actually sitting, like, listening, hearing this. Now, what's the most important thing that you can gain from that information? You're not going to be able to attach the howl to a subject because it's half a mile away. You're not going to be able to find any evidence from where you're standing because you're a half a mile away. But what you can figure out is a direction. Most people's smartphones, their googly phones, has a compass app, a very basic compass app. And most of those things, if you basically say it came from that way and you find center and you point your phone there, will actually read you, I know the iPhone will read you a bearing, a 360-degree bearing from where you are, and it will also give you a GPS location. Now, the estimation that you have to do is the distance. Now, if you're in the same place all the time, which is what I love about the Brown property, and this is why I want to go back there, is if you're in the same place all the time, having this activity happening around you, you can actually take other bits like that dog yapping from this direction. Okay, well, that's this neighbor's dog, and you can actually measure that. Well, where is that? How far away is that? Because this seemed to be about that distance or twice that distance, or so you can estimate distance from a point on a map with a heading, and then all of a sudden you have a line that has an indefinite end. You can take that to Google Earth, you can take that to a topo map, and you can say, well, they probably weren't here because that's in in the shopping mall, in the Home Depot, but they were here, or you can take a little bit of a leap like that. But once you start doing that from a particular location that's active, and you start having all of these kind of lines coming out in tendrils, you actually can develop a path that you think that they might be passing through. This might take a year, it might take 2 years, but you could effectively really come up with a good idea of where you think that these creatures are moving through. Audio is important. I'm also trying to figure out how, and somebody who's a little bit better at math, and I only just thought of this the other day, could actually, I was thinking about doing it on here I am 360 degrees, I'm thinking a circle, but on an X and Y axis, if you took 4 microphones and placed them at true north, east, and west, and south, a good distance away from your camp, where you also have a recorder, of course. It would take 5 recorders, so it's a kind of a ridiculous setup. But if you had 5 people that all had some sort of audio recorders that were similar, the best would be all the same model, and basically measured the difference in amplitude of that sound, could you not take an XY axis and plot exactly a distance from center, which would give you a direction, even if you were asleep? You could have these things running all the time, and you could actually mathematically, based on an array of audio recorders, actually say, okay, well, this came from there, and this came from there, and this came from there, to an estimate. Then you'd have to go there and see where that actually was, or why they would have to be there. Is there any evidence of this? But again, over the course of time, correlation does not equal causation, but correlation is a correlation, and you can correlate an estimated path, and then you can then test your hypothesis and go there the times that you think that they're there.
And I've been, one of the things that I've been trying to talk to a lot of people, parabolic dishes in audio are wonderful tools for finding direction of things. But as far as just maintaining audio goes, you're better off with open mics, because you'll miss things on a parabolic if it's behind it. It won't hear it. Parabolic dishes are not really designed to amplify sound. They're designed to specify locations of sounds. So if I want to hear what's going on over there, I grab my parabolic dish and I point it in that direction. So if I think there's a Bigfoot over there, then I swing my parabolic dish over there to listen to what's going on in the woods over there. It's not really designed to, stick up on the top of your shed, and unless you're specifically trying to monitor one specific side of a mountainside. If you're trying to specifically target one specific direction, then a parabolic dish is awesome. But if you don't know where your vocals are coming from, you are by far better off just with open microphones.
Now, omnidirectional microphone, like what again, like a parabolic is kind of like a trail cam. You have to be basically pointed directly at it at the time that it happens to record it. So for recording purposes, for tracking and other purposes, it's great. If you've spotted something, like, you know, like parabolic is great for, like, you know, birding. I referred to the Macaulay, like, lab of ornithology. Like, you know, like if you see, hey, there's a magpie, I'm going to shoot my parabolic directly at it until it sings correctly for me, and I'm going to record that. I'm going to put it in the database. I'm going to give it an LNS catalog number, and we're going to have that forever. Okay. But we're not at that stage. Like, so my whole thing is, like, you know, the way my brain works all the time is like, okay, so I go out and I have these unanswered questions, like, what the hell is that? So now I want, like, I want to go and figure out what that is. So I need as much data as I can, so I can figure out how I can potentially put myself or a parabolic or something, like, you know, a finer, you know, like finer hone on what I'm trying to listen to based upon a bunch of information that's not there. That's in the lounge recently. I posted my feelings on field biology versus squatching. Like, that's the difference. Is that, like, you know, you have this broad question, and we're all stuck on this broad question. It's like, no, like okay, well, that's an interesting sound. How would I get data out of that? How would I get data out of that? And that's how my brain works all the time. And it may or may not, like, it could completely debunk the whole thing. And then we go through and we find a bunch of coyotes, like, dancing jigs and playing fiddles and stuff out there, like something that shouldn't be there, right? So, but that's the process that you have to go through to really, like, and at some point it puts you in a good position to, like, not just mamby-pamby throw up game cams because the deer go through there. Well, the Sasquatch don't go through there, obviously, because you're not catching them on your game cam. So if you had a path that you could correlate based upon all the audio that's going on, you know, and put up your best guesses, that's called testing your hypothesis. It's either going to bear out or it's not. It's going to be a passed hypothesis or a failed hypothesis. But you got to do it, and it's probably going to take you a lot of time and energy, and that's why nobody does this in the field. Because
that's exactly right. The actual amount of field research that's going on versus squatching that's going on is probably 99 to 1. Because it takes years of study of one particular area to really even understand what is normally going through what normal animals are going through those areas. Where are the food sources? Where are the water sources? How long do those water sources and food sources last? It's taken me 3 years of study of the Sierras and 1 year of study on the ground up there to understand how the food sources are working and how the Bigfoot activity is working up there. Basically, it's follow the rodents. That's what I've learned up there in the Sierras. No rodents, no Bigfoot activity. You're either too high or you're too low. So go find the rodents. Where are the rodents at? The rodents are right at where the berries are just about almost rotten. Because that's what's left over. All the good stuff's been eaten. So that's what the rodents get, is the leftover crap. And they're really, really happy about it. That's what makes them rodents. However, no rodents, no Bigfoot. It's kind of the way things are working up there. But that's taken 3 years of study and a solid summer of boots on the ground to really get understanding. And that's one side of one mountain in the Sierra Range. I mean,
so next year you'll have to do like the next quarter of that mountain.
Right. Well, that's next year we're going to start lower on the mountain instead of worrying about waiting until summertime and actually start understanding what's happening and see if we can't find the springtime squatch activity. We know where the summertime activity is. We're following the fall activity right now. Matter of fact, we've got a trip probably going, well, I'm not even going to talk about that because people just like to ruin stuff like that. So, yeah, we're still going to be researching there until the snow falls, pretty much. And then we're going to not quit. Even though the snow's falling, it's going to be cold. Yeah, we can prepare for that. We can stay warm. We just need to find locations that we can get to and test hypothesis. That way we know where to start in the springtime. If we can keep just a little bit of activity going through over the wintertime and having an idea of which particular valleys they're wanting to move into, then that'll make springtime squatching a whole lot easier. And while we're talking about that, David, it's just about that time.
And now for tonight's topic.
Tonight's topic we're going to be talking about, that's right, full-time squatching tips. Why does everybody quit squatching? Because it gets cold. This is the time of year, people, that things change in the woods, and it actually gets advantage humans. I mean, because literally the amount of cover that these animals have been dependent on all summer long is going away. And it's actually my favorite time of the year to be squatching. It is literally the first week of October till about the second week of November. What are you thinking, David?
Up here, okay, so North Cascades is like for everything we say about it, it's wet and it's cold most of the time, but it's mild. It's cold all the time. It's like if you average the temperature, it's like 60 degrees all year round. It doesn't really get that cold, so there's no reason to stop going out there, and there's no reason for the Sasquatch to stop eating things to stay alive. So what are you going to do? Like the biggest thing, like the first thing you notice, like if you go out and you go into the places that I'm looking at up here, is that you can't see the forest for the trees. I mean, that's a true statement. Like you walk out there to nothing. You can't see anything but what's right in front of you, which is great if you're a creature living out there that just wants to be by itself. Now, when most of that green cover lifts, I mean the deep forest is going to be exactly the same. The ferns don't die like 100%. Like they're still like there's ground cover, and there's still a lot of trees, and there's still a lot of places to hide. But those river valleys sparse out, and all of a sudden in those areas, +1 humans.
Yeah. And that becomes the thing, is they're still coming down into those river valleys to eat. There's still an abundance of food. If they're not eating what's coming out of the rivers themselves, then they're actually eating the stuff that's going to the rivers that's eating the stuff that's coming out of the river. I mean, there's always a reason for large mammals, especially omnivores like bears and a Sasquatch, to continue to use those river bottom areas all winter long.
Oh, absolutely. Well, bears hibernate, okay, but they don't hibernate the way that we think that they do. I mean, they're not going to like go all the way up to the very tippy top of the mountain and just hang out in the snow where there's absolutely nothing. I mean, that's not what happens. I mean, they find these valley areas. It's one of the reasons why I don't like going into one of my most interesting areas during like late November through like early March. I don't like going up there because I've found bear dens that were vacated in like late March. I'm like, yeah, well, that would have been something that I could have fallen into while I was walking over the top of the snow, and that would have ended badly for me.
Hungry bear.
Yeah. Well, it's a hungry bear, but he's also a pissed off bear. He's like, just what the fuck? So anyway, but yeah, but again, those areas, those just nice, like protected and warm water areas, if you will, is where things are going to be. But fall, everybody, the leaves they fall, they turn to gold, they turn to red, and it's beautiful, and they all hit the ground. It rains, it's moist, it's wet. It's like the perfect nutrient farm. The mushrooms come out. Washington, we get apples and pears in the wild. We get all of these other things like the late fall fruit. I mean, this is harvest time. This is when everything comes, like to full fruiting. This is the best time If you ask me, like the berries are good. That's
just
kind of
fruiting.
yeah. Like berries are good, but like for everything else, like this is like max time.
Yeah, this is the time of fattening up right before they're getting ready to go to sleep.
And we're going into the lean times, so this is where you have to be really, really careful. Late summer to early fall is also the end, and some of the larger, fish runs on the West Coast. From north to south, they kind of all come in at different times or whatever. So that's notable and important as well. And a lot of the nutrients that come around that. But so the most interesting thing to me is how fall is always like, we view it as the deadening, but everything else views it as the fattening, basically. It's like when
all the harvest is ready, everything's out there. I think the biggest thing that in my brain is the loss of cover. Especially here. I mean, not here, especially if you go back east. Along the Appalachian Mountains, you don't have a whole lot of pine. There isn't a whole lot of that going on up there. It's all hardwood and birch and maples and oaks, just giant deadfall trees. They literally look like, the Nightmare Before Christmas forests, because there's just no leaves on these things for hundreds upon hundreds of hours. And when they get dry, you can hear stuff coming. And that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about was, the summertime when everything's green and lush and everything else, sound is deadened. That's just pure knock down the sound to everything. But come fall time when everything's bouncing off of the ground and bouncing off of the leaves and everything else, sit and listen. Don't look in obvious places. Don't sit and wait for a Sasquatch to cross a field. Guess what? He's probably not going to. From my experience in Pennsylvania, it seemed like they like to parallel the field so that they can see what's going across the field as well. So not just get out there into a rush, but sit and listen with your own ears and see what's going on, and you might be able to find the actual big trails that the larger mammals are using, and I've always found that those become useful as well.
Exactly. And so I'm trying to think how to tie this all together. So while you're sitting out there and while you're listening and while, like, the rush of the wind through the leaves isn't deafening everything that's going on around you, because sound waves run into each other. Like if you're sitting underneath the canopy of leaves or around, like, on a riverbank, and there's just like the beautiful sound of the leaves rushing across each other, that's sending out sound waves, and everything that's coming to you is hitting those and refracting off of them and getting muddled, basically. Because at the point when it hits you, you want to hear those really. We've talked about sound before. You want cold, cool, crisp air. The less humid, the better. So fall is, up here is not the best time for that. It depends on what time of day it is. Early morning, from about 4 in the morning till about 9 in the morning, not the best time, but the rest of the day is as crisp as you're ever going to get for sound. And once those leaves come off and there's nothing else going on, it's still perfect. Record your audio in the fall. You don't want to be out there in the winter. That would be optimal, but like, record your audio in the fall, because that, like, a calm night in the fall that's dry is gonna get you way more distance to what you're listening to than anything else. Which is another thing, like, if you're gonna build, like, I was thinking about this, like, how would I build an algorithm to, like, decibels versus distance versus a known, like, if I could take something static, like, this is 100 decibels, and I'm going to play it, like, down a road every 0.1 miles and get a read on that and get a visual, measure the device.
That's called sonar.
So the problem with that is that every time the barometric pressure and humidity changes, your results are going to change. And then I threw that out immediately. I'm like, wait a minute, like, let's think about this. Like, every night is going to be different, so I can't actually calculate on that at all. I could find an error, like, between this and this, but it's just not worth it to me. But anyway, you're gonna get more. Like you can't exactly figure that out mathematically from like an array of audio recorders, but you're gonna get more distance off of those cool, clear nights than you are anywhere else. And also being at the lower elevation with your recorders versus the higher elevation, you're going to be able to get a better recording of the sound that's happening wherever it's happening, even if it's on the same plane or lower. Like the lowest you can get on the coolest, calmest night is the best.
Sounds like that's what we're looking at here. People stay warm, dress warm, make sure that you don't get hypothermia out there because that ain't nothing to play with. Don't get frostbite because those pieces don't come back. Don't just understand fall can get cold at night, especially up in the mountains. We're talking in the 30s. Good snow on you. Be prepared. That's important too. But don't fall time is the time when animals are moving, and the more movement, the more chance of you actually being able to eyeball one of them things for yourselves. Hopefully your camera's ready. We won't beat you up if they're not. God to help you, you wouldn't be the first one. But that's really going to kind of wrap it up for us on the everything changes in the fall. So take a second look at what you're doing, re-gear, and consider new tactics. Maybe things will break loose for us. Anything to add to that?
Just listen. Listen. Look. And don't think that every single thing has to be Sasquatch, but don't discount it. Also, like if it's of note, mark it, write it down, put it in your pocket, and keep on. That line of thought. Like, how are you going to extract the data the next time you get this interesting thing happening? So that's the real, that's the discipline, if you will, like the scientific discipline that this field lacks, and it drives me crazy. And we probably should have had this solved like 5 times over at some point.
Yeah, that's, if we could get a whole lot more cooperation and a whole lot less drama, things would be a hell of a lot better all the way around. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us for this week. I got to tell you, the throat's getting a little bit better, but I'm almost there. I'm going to be out at the Mare Island Paracon convention. The tickets are all sold out, or I'd give you the information to come out and see me, but that's going to be this Saturday, the 11th. So we'll be back next week where we'll have a better topic on something a little more specific yet to be announced. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the Squatchers Lounge Podcast Season 2, Episode 37. I am the Reverend Jeff Kelly, and for Father David Batdorf, may the Squatch be with you.
Yeah.
Oh, we forgot to talk about the Sasquatch taking a poop. That was funny as hell.
Poop.
That's why we can't find any crap in the woods.
Sam Squanch doggy bags.
Jesus, boys, it's a Sam Squanch.